Guys, welcome back to the channel, doing another Serial Killer Files reaction. So if you like this type of content, you want to see more content like this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new to the channel, share the content. We really appreciate it, and we'll go ahead and dive into this Serial Killer Files. And again, yes, definitely hit the like button, because that is a for sure way to tell us that you really want to see more content like this. So we will do more if you guys hit the like button. Thank you.
Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov.
Thank you.
One of the most infamous serial killers of all time. A man who feared the eyes of his victims, a genetic condition that resulted in the deaths of more victims, and behavior that could be considered some of the strangest to ever see a courtroom. All this and more on this episode. Let's open the serial killer file.
Interesting. Well, he looks kind of creepy.
Andrei Chikatilo was brought into the world during great times of human degradation. Born on October 16, 1936, in a small Ukrainian village, Andrei and his family faced the hardships of struggling to stay alive during the man-made famine known as Holodomor. It was estimated that approximately 2.4 to 7.5 million Ukrainians died as a result of Joseph Stalin's enforced agricultural collectivization. Wow. Farmers made zero wages and were forced to hand over their land and livestock to factory collective farms, leaving villagers with practically nothing. In fact, times of desperation were so brutal that his own mother traumatized Andrei after telling them that prior to his birth, his older brother Stepan was kidnapped, murdered, and cannibalized by neighbors. Andrei and his family lived in a small one-bedroom hut and had no choice but to survive off of leaves and grass on the ground. His father had adored him and his sister. However, his mother was a bitter woman and would frequently berate Andrei on a daily basis. For years, Andrei suffered with the embarrassment of being a bedwetter. Since he shared a small bedroom with his mother and sister, his mother would often beat him every time an accident occurred. It was World War II, and Andrei was living through German occupation in Soviet Russia. As a child, Andrei was exposed to viewing corpses on the streets, women being raped, all while living a life of shame after his father, Roman, surrendered himself to the Germans and was held captive in concentration. Society saw his father's actions as weak and pitiful. A person who was a prisoner of war either lived or died serving their country with dignity, not giving up. Villagers saw Andrei's family as cowards, resulting in their small hut being burned to the ground. In school, Andrei was considered an incredibly intelligent student that was painfully shy around his peers. Students would constantly bully him, severely shattering any ounce of self-esteem he was ever able to muster. This caused Andrei to become introverted and scared to talk to females he took an interest in. But Andrei believed his intelligence made him superior to his peers. As an adolescent, Andrei viewed sex as a shameful act, but was envious towards anyone who could have a successful sex life. For as long as Andrei could remember, he failed to become sexually aroused unless inflicting severe physical harm on anyone.
It sounds like most of them.
With. His first sexual.
It sounds like most of these serial killers have like a strange fascination with getting a sexual thrill through killing or just violence.
Encounter took place at the age of 15 when he attempted to rape an 11-year-old girl. After the child struggled to be released from his grasp, Andrei became excited and accidentally ejaculated before he could rape his victim. Inadvertently, Andrei had discovered that fear and violence excited him more than the act of sex itself. Andrei graduated in 1954 and applied to the University of Moscow in hopes of studying law. He believed due to his intellect that he would succeed in this education, but failed to prove himself right after flunking his entry exams. Being certain that he would have made it into such a highly respected school, Andrei truly believed that he had been rejected because of his father's ill reputation held by the public. With no other option, Andrei became involved in the army, where he was able to get a first-hand experience with violence. Once completing his 3-year KGB communications unit in Berlin, Andrei joined the Communist Party and moved to Russia in 1961. It was a new start to life, and Andrei was no longer bothered by his past. Now working full-time in Russia as a communications engineer, all Andrei needed was a chance at starting a family. In 1963, Andrei married a young woman by the name of Feodosia. The marriage had appeared to be arranged by his sister, who knew that Andrei had a difficult time communicating with women.
He looks
just 2 weeks after their introduction,
stone
the two
cold
were
dead.
married.
Like his
However,
stare,
in no time,
his smile.
Feodosia learned of her husband's sexual dysfunctions, but was blind to his violent needs. Despite Andrei's near inability for conventional sex, the two were able to conceive their first daughter, Ludmila, in 1965, and son Yuri in 1969. Wanting to provide more for his family, Andrei completed a correspondence course in Russian literature at Rostov University. His degree would give him the opportunity to regain a feeling of control, leading students as a literature teacher.
Oh, I'm
From the
sure he's
beginning
gonna
of his career, no one
take
could
advantage
take him
of that.
seriously, and Andrei's self-esteem suffered further. Students saw
Great.
Andrei as a weak and unimpressive man that failed to control classroom behavior. Though he understood the subjects he was teaching, students would pick on him and disregard him as a man of authority. Taking advantage of his modest behavior, students would threaten to beat him, belittling his masculinity and dominance. Andrei felt like a failure in everything he did, and he knew he was unable to seize discipline from children who saw him as nothing but a joke. In 1973, Andrei sexually assaulted a 15-year-old student, grabbing her breasts and genitals. Though the school board was informed of this assault, nothing was done to reprimand him. Professors
No, of
would
course
often
not.
encounter
Fucking
Andrei
horrible.
fondling himself around his students and was caught watching female students undressing in their dormitories. After many complaints
Oh my
against him,
God.
Andrei was forced to resign his position
Thank
or be
God.
fired. With his
I was like sitting here thinking, like, at least tell me they fired him after that, and it sounds like they did.
unaware of his sexually deviant behaviors, Andrei decided to resume his teaching elsewhere in the city, but was unlucky due to employee cutbacks. Andrei took his teaching to the Russian city of Shakhty, where he'd resume his sexual advances on young children. Andrei was 42
Fuck this
years
guy.
of age when he finally realized that killing was his only way to satisfy his sexual needs. On December 22, 1978, Andrei lured 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova
it's
to
a
an
kid.
old shack he secretly purchased in order to rape women and children. Unable to have an erection, Andrei failed to rape the little girl and began stabbing her with a knife. Yelena was forced onto the ground and was viciously stabbed multiple times in the stomach. The excitement of the blood pouring freely onto the floor and spraying onto his body caused Andrei to ejaculate on the child. After he heard her attempt to talk, Andrei strangled her until she was unconscious and tossed her body into a nearby river. Officers found the child's body 2 days after the murder and questioned Andrei due to the strong amount of evidence against him. Blood from the child was found in the snow and trailed right towards his property. However,
should have been it
Andrei
right there.
denied knowing the child. Police didn't hesitate to make an arrest and apprehended 25-year-old Alexander Kravchenko, a nearby neighbor who had murder and rape charges previously laid
Oh,
against him.
shit.
Alexander was wrongfully convicted of the murder and was executed for it. With luck on his side,
Holy shit, he just totally got away with the first murder. And so, you lucky son of a bitch. Some guy, I guess, close to him already had charges of murder and rape underneath him. And just, oh, that's the guy who did it. What are the fucking odds? What are the chances of that?
Andrei felt he was untouchable and was able to slip free from
Yeah, I bet
his
after
first
that,
kill.
what a
By
horrible...
1981, Andrei had quit his job as a teacher and moved on to be a supply clerk in a local industrial complex. Andrei was selfish and desired to fulfill his urges. On September 3rd, 1981, Andrei waited by a local bus station where he came across a 17-year-old girl named Larissa. In order to gain her trust, Andrei promised her vodka if she'd walk with him to the closest forest. A rebellious teenager without care, Larissa followed Andrei to a secluded area of the forest where the two attempted to engage in sexual intercourse. Unable to achieve an erection as usual, Andrei became violent, beating and pinning her to the ground, placing copious amounts of dirt into her mouth in an attempt to stop her from screaming. Without a weapon in his possession, Andrei strangled the victim with his bare hands and brutally mutilated her body by tearing through her with his teeth. It was noticeable at her crime scene that Andrei ripped off one of her nipples and left the body in the exact location with dirt and leaves covering what remained of her. A third victim fell into Andrei's trap on June 12, 1982.
That should have told
when he
him right
traveled to
there.
the municipal district of Rostov. Nearby the bus station, Andrei encountered a 13-year-old girl who was walking alone back home from an afternoon shopping trip. Following his victim down a narrow path, Andrei pounced on her, dragged her into a secluded ditch, tore off her clothes, and slashed her 22 times to the head, neck, chest, and genitals. It was a popular superstition at the time that a murder victim's last moments were imprinted on their eyes, and because of this, Andrei cut into her eyes and mutilated her eye sockets. And like so many others, Andrei's urges became worse and worse, as did his behavior. Andrei was able to persuade people of many ages with his warm trust.
When it comes to kids, like really, and kids, it's so hard to listen to. Like, it's hard to listen for anybody. 17, 20, 50, 70, 80, 90, doesn't matter. It's hard to listen to murder. But to think of like a 9-year-old getting raped and stabbed is just some of the toughest shit to listen to.
From young children to older females, prostitutes, and runaways, Andrei was on a killing spree. It became relevant to Rostov investigators that multiple bodies were being located in forests and alongside rivers with similar killing patterns. Many of the bodies were mutilated beyond recognition. Victims were found with exposed eye sockets, intestines disemboweled, genitals mutilated. In fact, the murders were so incredibly messy and utterly morbid that investigators believed the crimes were being committed by a person of special needs. A Moscow police team was soon dispatched. By 1984, locals were able to give a description of the potential killer. The manhunt
there's
for
real
Andrei had
photos.
resulted
Good
in
God.
law enforcement solving over 1,000 unrelated crimes, including 245 rapes and 95 murders. On September 13th, 1984, Andrei was apprehended by an undercover police officer at a Rostov bus station after he was spotted luring a young child. Inside of his briefcase, he was carrying a large knife. Investigators were able to take semen samples at his victims' crime scenes, and they believe that this gave them a break in their case after learning that their killer was blood type AB. But when taking Andrei's blood, lab reports indicated that Andrei was blood type A. What investigators failed to discover was that Andrei lived with an incredibly rare genetic condition in which the only way to get an accurate blood test from Andrei would be to test his blood itself, not his semen or anything else. Otherwise, the results would not match. With insufficient evidence against Andrei, investigators had no other option but to release Andrei from custody the following day. Though Andrei got away with his murders, he was sentenced to a full year of jail time for stealing offenses. This caused him to be expelled from the Communist Party. Instead of a 1-year sentence, Andrei was freed after 3 months in prison. After his release, Andrei found a new job in a locomotive factory where he kept a low profile until mid-1985. As time went on, Andrei just got better and better at killing. Andrei continued his pursuit and was unknowingly under surveillance by Moscow investigators. In November of 1990, Andrei mutilated 22-year-old Svetlana Korostik in a wooded area nearby a transit station. Just as he left the scene, an undercover detective watched Andrei as he washed himself off by a well. Just as Andrei passed the detective, it was noted that he had dirt and grass stains on his jacket, as well as a red smear across his cheek. It would be nearly 2 weeks later when officers would unearth Svetlana's mutilated body. She would be the 36th known victim in the case.
36
Andrei
women
was deemed suspicious
and
by
kids.
investigators, but without sufficient evidence to make a formal arrest, officers continued keeping a close eye on him. Andrei was sure to keep an eye on the manhunt in local newspapers. He assumed that he was under the radar, making himself the perfect murderer. On November 20th, 1990, Andrei was seen leaving his home with a large jar that he attempted to fill with beer at a small kiosk by his local park. Andrei was planning on using the jar of beer to lure his next victim. However, this would all come to an end when a group of undercover investigators followed Andrei, attempting to lure children, resulting in his arrest. This would be the second and final time that Andrei would be taken into police custody. Andrei believed he was far more intelligent than investigators and proclaimed his innocence. Officers were also able to discover a knife and rope in Andrei's possession during his arrest. For 10 days, Andrei was placed inside a cell in KGB headquarters. Detectives told Andrei that he was a sick man, and if he confessed to the murders, he would not be prosecuted by reason of insanity. After days of denying his involvement in the murders, Andrei eventually confessed to 34 of the 36 murders on November 30th, 1990. He was able to give a full confession of each murder, showing investigators the crime scenes and explaining ways he would murder his victims. He would later go on to confess to an additional 22 killings. Andrei was charged with the murder of
an additional
53
22
women and children during his time killing, and he was held for psychiatric evaluation. The following year, on August 20th, 1991, Andrei was transferred to the Serbsky Institute in Moscow to undergo a 60-day psychiatric evaluation to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. Further evaluation indicated that Andrei suffered from borderline personality disorder with sadistic features. Despite this, Andrei was deemed legally sane and competent to stand trial. On April 14, 1992, Andrei stood trial in front of hundreds of mourning family members. Many were able to describe the madness as a circus rather than a court
wanting him
appearance.
dead.
For Andrei's safety, investigators placed him inside of a steel bar cage while the public screamed, cried, and even fainted in his presence. Andrei was charged with 52 counts of murder, in addition to 5 charges against minors committed when he was a teacher. The trial became one of the first major media events of liberalized post-Soviet Russia. During the trial, Andrei yelled and acted as an insane individual. He would laugh, interrupt the trial,
I think I've heard of
sing,
this.
and expose himself to the court, stating, "Look at this useless thing. What do you think I could do with that?" Andrei would formally address the courtroom in a 2-hour statement, informing the families that he had been a man robbed of his genitals. He claimed to be cursed with a lifetime of sexual frustration and did not originally wish to kill. On October 15, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty for the 52 murders and 5 counts of sexual assault. He was sentenced to death plus 86 years, and the verdict enraged Andrei, and he kicked his bench and screamed. On the 14th of February 1994, Andrei was taken from his death row cell to a soundproof room and was executed with a single gunshot behind the right ear. Though it was discovered that Andrei had killed between 52 and 56 people, it's often believed that that true number is much, much higher.
I wouldn't doubt it.
And of course, don't forget to click subscribe.
Okay. Yeah, that was rough to get through. I've heard of the trial. I've heard of that trial. I know I have. I didn't realize that the guy was responsible for that many deaths. That is just fucked. And all to high hell. Mind-blowing that he got away with so many when they were watching him so closely, and yet he still got away with that many murders. I just blew my mind. The fact that the guy was living next to another criminal or someone who's been convicted was pure fucking luck. The fact that he was also somebody who was convicted of murder and rape, and here we go with this guy just starting out, so no one was truly suspecting him. Like, no one was like on that level of like, yes, this is him, absolutely 100%. They were suspecting him, but then automatically this guy who was also had history with that kind of stuff was right next to him, or like on the same street or wherever, was just like, wow, what luck. What luck. He was killed for the acts of someone else. Crazy. Crazy. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Holy shit, Michael. We made it to We Slaughtered Barbecue. The epitome and the purpose of our trip is to make it to this area.
Oh yes. Food and cattle.
Yep. I just noticed, is that a cemetery way over there, or are those cattle?
No, I think that is a small cemetery.
Holy shit, that's kind of cool and creepy. That thing is massive, but there's not just that one. There are spiders literally
There's
everywhere.
one there. There's one there. There's one over there. And then there's this one here.
Dude, they're everywhere on the property.
Huge.
It's
Oh,
cool.
there's one there.